I'm Lailee McNair Bakhtiar, author of Esther Entering Your Destiny. I was the television host and producer of a PBS television program called Authors and Critics in San Mateo, California for 10 years. I interviewed over 400 authors. During that time, I had an opportunity to practice my interviewing techniques, and with that, as the host and producer of Writers Forum and Book Review in Burlingame, California, owned at the time by the Washington Post Newsweek cable television channel, I interviewed Winston Churchill's biographer Martin Gilbert, novelist Ken Follett, author Ernest J. Gaines, Isabel Allende, Maxine Hong Kingston, Chitra Divakaruni, Roxanne Farman-Farmion, and many more. Later, I had an opportunity to finish 4 books of my own poetry, and most recently to finish this book, which took 6 years, on Esther. So this is the third segment, reading from Esther Entering Your Destiny. Expanding my analysis of Queen Esther in context of her physical place, her geography, I recalled my personal trip to modern Shushan, which was the site of Old Susa, in October of 2000. There I had the opportunity, firsthand, to see the positive, enduring character traits, particularly the warm hospitality and compassion of Persian tribal women. I loved these humble people of the wind, featured in a documentary by James Mason entitled People of the Wind. My mother was raised with the tribes in Masjid Suleiman. The tribal women were administering life alertly, expertly organizing, and gathering around a campfire for tea. They moved over the landscape and understood their position in the high desert Zagros Mountains during their biannual 150-mile vertical migration for water for their flocks. My grandfather was a Bakhtiari tribesman who became an American-educated doctor, married a Christian wife, and returned to Persia with a passionate mission to help the people with their medical sufferings that our modern medicine could cure. As a team, my grandmother and grandfather had a vision. They defined the direction of serving the tribe through coherent care with a singleness of purpose of healing. Infant mortality was high. Inoculations were new. In Susa of Esther, only about 80 miles from Masjid Suleiman, where my mother was raised, Esther was an unlikely queen. She was strong enough and wise. Esther did not fade, but provided her energy into God's plan to restore the exiles to their ancestral home, Jerusalem. I believe Esther of Susa was designed by God for his purposes amongst women whose intent was loving, obedient, and ancient history as humble as the shepherds. My mother was raised about 80 miles from Persepolis, the actual home of Esther. The difference was 2,500 years in time. The transformative path of Esther is explained in Scripture. The willingness, similarly, of the tribal women surrounding the Persepolis Palace forged a strong connection, to me, between Esther and God's plan. As resourceful tribal women of that region, they lived along one of the stops on the major Silk Route of history. The tribal women traveled like a human bridge. The infinite wrinkle between the tribal women and Esther was that they did not know some of her truths. For vigilant Esther in Elam, Persia, she loved the God of Moses. Scripture was her source of courage after praying. This world was not Esther's rest, but Susa was her home. In the constant business of Susa, Esther continued to trust God, much like Daniel, to lead her as she let go of her own fear. In her life-changing moment, Esther stood on the truth of the word in Scripture. The disastrous decree that had become settled law meant that Esther could not only lose her royal crown, but also her life. And if she went to the king unannounced, she could be put to death. However, Esther's crown of righteousness would shine. What was the specific problem? A plot had been hatched by the chief administrator of the Persian Empire, by Haman, against the Jewish people. And he hated them, and he had a quest for control in the kingdom. Haman had succeeded in tricking the king to make their extermination an irrevocable Persian law. The king, Xerxes, did not understand that the attack was aimed solely at the innocent Jews. King Xerxes was told it was against rebellious elements. The Jewish people in 127 provinces of the Persian Empire were pinpointed for death. The sanctioned murders would include women and children. Esther's agonizing terror was that the slaughter condemned defenseless Jewish people. She could not sit idly by, but what could she do? How could Esther stop the systematic annihilation of the Jews? She was not a powerless bystander. Esther was an ethical queen. Also, Esther's logical legacy was Jewish, but her husband, the king, did not know that Esther was Jewish. She held that information from him. Esther acknowledged Mordecai's warning that she risked the crown of fleeting power of a worldly queen if she refused to accept the eternal king. God was her creator, who gave her life and to whom she owed her existence. She might prevent persecution, oppression, and death because her identity was not known by the king. Esther's faith foundation was pivotal in her decision process. Can one be enlightened with Scripture? Yes. Transforming, translating through the door to eternity with grace, a gift from God. What does one campaign for in one's own life? Obedience to a worldview different from gospel? Cloud's solutions. Esther participated in politics. Her attitude was powerfully clear. Esther had a mission to rescue the Jews. In view of history, Esther was the Jewish custodian of an exiled people at a very specific moment in time during the final season of the remnant being able to return to rebuild a second temple and secure a Jerusalem wall. Facing this savage decree by Haman, a cruel and vicious administrator, Esther asked her people to fast and pray for her for 3 days. She assisted the king to know the truth. Esther was a sentinel showing leadership. This is what happened during the time of King Xerxes, the king who ruled 127 states from India to Kush. Esther 1:1. I'll continue with the amazing story of Esther in my next segment. Thank you.